In this video, we're going to take a quick look at this lighting setup, and we're going to learn how to break it down to how we got it on the set day, as well as maybe take a look at a couple of options as to how we could have made it look more like this. Hey, my name's Joshua Valentine. I'm a filmmaker, cinematographer out of the Atlanta area, and I love seeing specifically indie films inspire me. And what I've wanted to do for a while is take indie films and break down the lighting and even the storytelling that happens inside of them and figure out some ways we can use those tools and that inspiration from possible films to inspire me to make better films today. And what I've wanted to specifically do is not only think that we can't make those films or we can't do those lighting setups because we don't have the money to do it. I wanted to kind of explore what it would look like to possibly do those lighting setups with a lot cheaper lights. So I'll be using some breakdowns in the examples, as well as linking to some expensive options, which I think are worth the money, as well as some budget options, which I think are worth spending money on to learn the setup. So let's jump right in. This was a lot of fun. The sweet toned memories called me into a beautiful song. So I remember doing this initially and like writing half of the film in the edit. So the background on this, my buddy got access to an Alexa Mini for a shoot, and he wanted to get used to the camera. So he told me to write something super quickly. And so I just came up with this idea, found an actress, asked if she would be willing to do this with us super quickly. And it was super duper, like no pre-production, just doing it. We had like one PA for one of the scenes. And so it was really stressful. And I remember thinking through like some of the different problems we had. And the biggest problem that we had is I learned a lot about the Alexa, and two things that I learned about the Alexa. It has the most beautiful, flexible image that I've ever used in my entire life. Like the Alexa Mini rumors are true. Like Alexa's beautiful. But what I also learned is that I never want to use Alexa unless I have to or I have a big crew. Because we were going to a bunch of different locations using an easy rig and this big 15-pound rig for an Alexa. And I think we had Cook S4s, and they're gorgeous setup. But it was a pain. Like it was a huge pain in the butt to be able to lug around, switch lenses, carry that thing up the mountain was a pain in the butt. And I really thought about the fact that I got one of the images on the mountain. Like you can see, it almost looks like it's soft light on her face, but that's the sun directly lighting on her. And the Alexa handles it like a champ, really getting the details in the background, as well as getting the details on her face and not making it look disgusting. But I feel like I would have rather gotten a mirrorless camera to save time and still get a good image like the Pocket 4K, and easily have gotten a diffuser to diffuse the light on the face to compensate for the lack of dynamic range, as well as possibly even brought just a higher output light to fill in to help with the dynamic range. I think both of those things would have taken less time than carrying the Alexa freaking Mini up on a hiking trail. Oh my God, it was awful. But jumping back in. But forgetful of its overwhelming patterns, coming back to a place I never thought I'd be, but still it calls me. Okay, this is really cool. So the entire film, again, like I wrote it in post. There was this section here where the poem doesn't perfectly communicate it because I just threw it together. It talks about this idea of her like having this memory of something beautiful. And I remember going through writing the poem, and it was some like self-reflection for me where like she's doing this beautiful dance and having these beautiful memories, but then she remembers something and messes up, and it feels like this jagged cut starts to pick up. And then what's really cool is I wanted to add music and sound effects, and then also the cutting and the editing to really intensify that emotion, where something simple shouldn't really cause that much stress, but it does. And so to show that, I wanted to cut really quickly, show some kind of visual analogy of the memory that really gave it some extra added depth and intrigue from multiple different sources. And I think I really liked what ended up happening with it. Place I never thought I'd be, but still it calls me. And then she goes over to the memory again to have this new scene, and I feel like it goes back in
its
flowing.
Winds and waves,
this is cool.
Flowing freely in its beautiful paths.
but it pulls me under. So before I get too deep into this last section, this was a lot of fun to shoot here. So I talk about the dynamic range of the Alexa Mini. This was all shot in shadows, and we were able to get cool looking silhouettes, as well as being able to really like create these silhouettes, as well as just beautiful soft images. You can see like this harsh like line of the difference between the hard light and the shadows, but we still have a really decent exposure on her. Again, huge praises to the Alexa Mini. I think there was some different ways that we could have gotten that similar look out of something cheaper, but it really shows off how much dynamic range you get from a super expensive camera. Flowing freely in its beautiful paths, but it pulls me on. And again, the flow into overwhelmed by the thought, the heaviness of something that once. And dude, this girl was a trooper, just killing it on performance. So we had her like jump in and then pretend to be drowning because she's standing in there. It's like super shallow, but I wanted to get this emotion of her feeling like her lack of ability to dance, or her lack of ability to dance perfectly, felt like she was trying to swim or dance in the water, and it was causing her to drown. And it's these memories that kind of caused that. And this was really intriguing. So I wanted to kind of finish off the whole heart of the film with this idea that you come to terms with your memories. And I was like, all right, how could we do that? And I was on set, and I remember seeing a blue gel and a small LED, and I was like, it'd be cool if a color gave the contrast and the emotion to be a character in the story. And I think it was a film challenge, and we needed 2 characters, and the second character was the blue light, whatever you kind of want to interpret that idea as. And it was a super duper simple setup, but literally just having this box be opened, and she opens up to the light, and then she's able to then dance on top of the water with peace because she's coming to terms with these past memories. It's not a perfect memory. It's not a bad memory. It's a broken memory that's okay. Like you're able to kind of like come to terms with the different experiences that you've had. And I think it was fun. Like it was a fun experience for me as well, like learning about like how to go through these personal emotions. I always feel like films are like a personal journey for me. And then getting to visually share that, I think, is a lot of fun. But if you go to the end, it just fades out. And I think I accidentally left like, what is that? 24 seconds of whatever black ending. That's really funny. But I think there's something really, really interesting to be said about having an intentional purpose for even simple and small things to happen in your films. Because I feel like that's what makes it cinematic. It's not, hey, that's the perfect lighting, or that's the perfect X, Y, and Z. It's using 12 different super minor things to make it look like you did one super important thing. And that can go to the music, to a voiceover, a poem, adding in some lighting, adding in different elements of depth. And what I like to use is this term depth, where you're giving distance to where this 2D dimensional character, they talk about like a 2D dimensional character, adding different things to make it feel like there's deepness without those things feeling like obvious. This was a lot of fun. I think there was a lot of things I could have done better, which I'll talk about in a second, but it was fun to look on this experience and think about how I was intentional to create depth. But let's go ahead and take a look at the lighting and see how we could add some depth to some of those scenes that might have felt a little flat. So if we jump right into the scene, you can see a really simple setup. This is pretty similar to how we had it set up in the loft upstairs. It was a really open area with an overhang and 2 windows giving some natural light in. And then we had a key, which could have been a 120D or a 300D going through a softbox. And then that could be anything from a Godox SL60, which is way cheaper. When we take a look at the actual scene, you can see that there's some directional light hitting her face, and then it gives some shadow on the side, motivated from the window depending on how we're positioning the camera, and it's a large source. It's kind of simple, but it looks pretty similar to what we had on the day. I would love to have done a couple of different things, and I think that we could have added to the scene pretty easily, so let's go ahead and try that now. I shot a light on the background to be able to give this experience that felt like the sunset was hitting the back of her head, as well as going through the window and creating some shape and definition on the background as well. I think doing something simple like this really helps add some dynamicness to a scene, and for the story we were going for, I feel like it would have really helped sell that she was in this hopeful moment in memory as she went into the actual memories. And let's break down what those things specifically are doing to the background. If you look here, this is really simple. We have a couple of C stands and then some LED lights or anything along those lines, which this could be an airy sky panel to have RGB YW control, or if you wanted to go simpler, you could get a simple Yongnuo YN216 with a tungsten gel on it and be able to shoot on the background to create the shape for the background, as well as we have one more light hitting the back of her head. If you look there, I ended up using a jail door because they didn't have actual cookies in the game, but you could do something like cardboard, paint it black, or anything that you could create the shape. And I wanted to illustrate that you could shoot it through rather than it actually being light that's coming from a window. There's a window in that area which helps it feel more natural and motivated, but it's not necessary for it to go through the actual window, which allows for us to control some more unique setups. What I really like about this is you could do this with any budget range. You could do it with a Yongnuo 216, you could use another Godox SL60 or the Good Video Maker equivalents of that and get some cheap gels and create some dynamic scenes. There's really no limit to what kind of scene you can create. And especially in video, even if you're limited by the output of the light or the output of the light matching the window, you could add some ND to the windows to be able to bring down the ambient light and then use some less bright lights and maybe even some higher ISO performing cameras to be able to create a similarly dynamic looking scene. A lot of these things do affect the final image, but it doesn't affect you being able to practice the creativity that goes into that image. And I think that watching a lot of these different indie films helps you get inspired to learn the tools, and then eventually when you have the paid gig, rent for the more expensive gear. If you look at the background, there's a lot of cool shape and definition. It's going through the cookie and creating that cool shape. You could do anything here. You could have done a tree, you could have done any kind of like candle or foliage or anything that really gave some definition to the background. And I like it here because it's a warmer tone, which could be nighttime or it could be daytime depending on what we do with the key. And what's really important to notice is we didn't only add light to the background, but we emulated that light was hitting the back of her head as well. We do that with an extra light and even a cheaper light to be able to tie that color in as a backlight. So this is a backlight, but not only is it a backlight, it's a motivated backlight from a quote unquote practical source, which is the sun. It makes the entire scene feel a lot more natural compared to what it would have been. And now we have something that feels almost like it's a nighttime scene. And I think that would have been really cool for the short film to give some time of her wondering and daydreaming as she practiced. It would have added for some tension in the story and made you feel like she was really, really engaged. Now, of course, during the set day, we only could shoot till 5 because the actress had a gig that she needed to get to. So there's a lot of times that you're limited on what you could do, but it's fun to dream about what you could have done so that you could apply that on future sets. Again, thank you so much for checking out this video. If you want to watch some more of these, I'm going to be trying to create them on the weekly, if not more than one a week. These are a lot of fun for me. So if you have a short film that you'd want me to break down, I'd love to check it out. I'm wanting to try and find indie films that have something unique about them. So shoot me a message and I'll check it out and see what we can do. But until then, I hope you get inspired by some indie films just like indie films inspire me.